It's all over. We've got a new heavyweight champion of the world.
No one could hold them back. Out in the heat they tried for the throne. They gave us hands on track. When the world by hand meant to heroes alive in our memories. Danger never died. Heroes alive in the world. You fought and burdened our nation to gold.
7 world champions, 6 Olympic gold medalists, 9 Empire titles, and a host of boxing heroes. The Champions Arena, man against man. The ultimate test of strength, cunning, and courage. Join us now as we trace the path of boxing in South Africa from its birth up to our modern era of the fighters.
Boxing, as we know it today, developed from bare-knuckle fighting, which is believed to have arrived in South Africa with the first British occupation of the Cape in 1795. Bare-knuckle fighting was at first a disorganized combination of fist fighting and wrestling, often ending in bloody mayhem, with the fighter who could endure the most punishment and remain on his feet acclaimed as the victor. In 1880, the sport received some legitimacy with the introduction of the London prize ring rules, which also allowed the wearing of skin-tight gloves. At this stage, although gaining in popularity, the sport was frowned upon by most as a barbaric pastime. What it needed was a man of character, someone to give it respectability. Such a man was James Robertson Cooper. Cooper was born to a middle-class Scottish family in 1854. He showed great promise as an amateur boxer in England and sailed the 7 seas as a member of the Royal Navy. He was something of a restless man. After several years as a mounted policeman in New Zealand, he traveled to Cape Town, where he labeled himself Professor Cooper and opened a gymnasium to teach the finer points of boxing. Cooper eventually settled on the diamond mines of Kimberley in the mid-1880s. He quickly established himself as the best fighter, bare knuckle or with the so-called mittens on. Being an educated man for the time, Cooper felt slightly embarrassed about his fondness of a socially unaccepted sport, sometimes referred to as the noble art of boxing. He was far prouder of the play he wrote, entitled Modern Chivalry, in which he'd performed the lead role to high acclaim. Barney Bonato, a rising business tycoon of the time, was a lover of the stage, often performing on and off the stage himself. He also had a love for boxing. And with this as common ground, he attempted to strike up a friendship with Cooper. Cooper, or Jamie as his followers called him, was an unabashed snob, however, and didn't like Bonato's crude manner. The discovery of gold led the two men to Johannesburg, where Cooper became friends with Abe Bailey, an all-round sports enthusiast and entrepreneur of the time, and Bonato's main business rival. Bonato was furious at being snubbed and vowed to get even with the toffee-nosed Cooper. He decided to bring the highly rated bare-knuckle fighter Wolf Bendoff from London to put Cooper in his place. The 27-year-old Bendoff was a heavyweight by today's standards, while the 35-year-old Cooper would have been a welterweight. Under the rules of the day, height and weight were regarded as irrelevant. At first, Cooper didn't want to accept the fight, but he was placed in a position where he had to defend his title and his reputation by the general hysteria caused by Bendoff's public challenge. A purse of £4,500 was set, winner take all. This is the highest purse ever fought for in the world under London prize ring rules. There was one more obstacle. Professional fist fighting was illegal in the Transvaal Republic. Due to the immense public interest in the fight, it was decided to approach President Paul Kruger for permission to stage the bout. Cooper's trainer, Tommy Harris, had a cordial relationship with the president. He was thus given the delicate task of approaching him. President, Harris began, there's a big Englishman in Johannesburg who boasts that he can thrash any man in the Transvaal. Kruger removed his pipe and surveyed Harris with a moody eye. Shoot him, he advised, and dismissed the subject summarily. Harris quickly told the president that such a hasty step was unnecessary, and after explaining the situation, Kruger agreed to let the crazy Uitlanders have their fight. Cooper was so determined to win against the bigger man that he set up his last will and testament. He was prepared to fight to the death. Interest was so intense in the fight that businesses and even the Johannesburg Stock Exchange closed down for the day. Eagle's Nest, south of Johannesburg. It was in this area that the first official championship in the yet ununified South Africa took place. 9:23 a.m., the 26th of July, 1889. The princely sum of £5 a head was charged for admission. Corrugated fences were erected to keep out the unwanted riffraff. But it helped little, as many scaled the fences to join the 500 paying customers. Cooper proved too fast and versatile for Bendoff, who could only plug away as best he could, trying to land the decisive blow. Under the prize ring rules, a round ended the moment a fighter went down. He then had 1 minute to resume battle, or be declared knocked out of time. Using a sharp left lead and drawing his opponent into fruitless and energy-sapping charges, Cooper gradually reduced Bendoff to helplessness, a bleeding hulk, half-blinded and pawing feebly in the direction of his tormentor. 2 hard lefts to the jaw ended the massacre in the 27th round. Cooper was cheered by his ecstatic supporters and carried around the ring triumphantly. His fame spread beyond the borders of the Transvaal, and more than 20 years before its union, South Africa had its first national sports hero. Cooper rose rapidly in stature and achieved great successes as a businessman. He also retained his interest in intellectual matters, writing a well-received novel. Despite all his success, Cooper was a moody man, suffering from depression. He frequently withdrew into solitude. On July the 23rd, 1897, South Africa was horrified. James Robertson Cooper committed suicide. Cooper's legacy stretched beyond his performances in the ring, As a promoter, he turned Johannesburg into a beehive of boxing activity. Perhaps Cooper's biggest achievement as a promoter was to stage the first fight ever in this country to feature a world champion, the legendary Kid McCoy. When McCoy visited Johannesburg in 1896, he was a handsome, deadly puncher. Regarded as one of the best welter and middleweights of all time, McCoy had little difficulty in disposing of his opponent, Bill Doherty, a young Australian fighter who was one of the many top international fighters who fought on the reef. Here, the slightly balding, middle-aged McCoy is seen sparring with former world heavyweight champion James J. Corbett. In his declining years, McCoy exchanged the boxing ring for employment as one of the pioneering actors of the silent movie era. He also started the Hollywood tradition of many marriages by walking down the aisle no fewer than 9 times. Most of Cooper's successors for the next decade had enjoyed the benefit of his coaching. Among them, Jim Holloway and Barney Malone. Holloway and Malone were to dominate the South African boxing scene and built up an intense rivalry, meeting in 3 official and 1 exhibition bout over a 12-year period. Holloway was the more scientific boxer, while Malone relied on his strength and spirit to win his battles. Their first confrontation ended in a draw over 73 rounds. The second bout, 5 years later, ended with Malone being disqualified. They then met in an exhibition bout, with Holloway proving the better. In their 4th and final fight, which took place in 1905, Malone won on a knockout in the 16th round. With the outbreak of the Second War of Independence, Holloway joined a Boer commando. Many boxers from foreign shores joined up in the struggle against the British Empire. Holloway was eventually captured and placed in a prisoner of war camp along with the outstanding Australian boxer Artie Tully. These 2 fellow prisoners earned the unique distinction of fighting for a South African title in Ceylon. Another former Cooper pupil, whose boxing career was ended by the war, was the famous Boer scout Jack Hinden. Barney Malone, whose boxing career spanned an incredible 34 years, staked a claim on having engaged in the longest fight ever under London prize ring rules. Malone, a welterweight by today's standards, knocked out Jan Silberbauer, a heavyweight, in the 212th round of a grueling battle near Kimberley. The bare-knuckle brawl lasted for 5.5 hours. Malone, who boxed until he was way past his 50s, spent his last days operating a pie and tea cart in Durban. In 1900, during the Second Anglo-Boer War, the noble art was used in a propaganda film, which was made to place President Kruger in a bad light.
Paul Kruger, as the villain of the piece, is dressed in black. His white-clad opponent is John Bull. A bitter fight ensues. Britain at that time was trying to secure American assistance in the war. Uncle Sam is therefore depicted as John Bull's second, while Paul Kruger is seconded by France and Russia. The second round. Naturally, at some stage, foul play may be expected of the villain. And yes, he trips up John Bull, the blackguard. Now he waves the white flag, and as John Bull turns around, he hits him from behind. The spectators are indignant. Uncle Sam is not to be outdone and kicks Kruger in protest.
Startling discoveries have been made which indicate that Vicky Tawil may not have been the first South African-born fighter to fight for a world title. Young Pluto, who challenged George Dixon, the Little Chocolate, unsuccessfully for the world featherweight title in New York in 1899, was, according to the American sports publication Police Gazette, a black man born as Joe Brown in Port Elizabeth in 1872. He subsequently emigrated to Australia, where he developed into a world title contender. All attempts to trace Pluto's descendants in Australia have been to no avail. Jack Leelor came to South Africa in the late 1890s as a bugler in the British Army. He settled here and developed into one of our greatest fighters. I discovered that I was pretty light on my feet. I had a solid punch in my left hand, and most important of all, I had a fighting brain. Somehow, I could sense what my opponent was thinking. By building on these instinctive qualities, Leelor won South African titles in 3 different weight divisions: welter, middle, and heavyweight. Leelor believed that success in the ring depended on speed, brains, and craftsmanship. At the age of 43, he made his final claim on the national heavyweight title by beating Nick van der Berg on points over 20 rounds. Leelor continued sparring and playing competitive cricket up to the age of 66. He was also a professional trombonist, specializing in Gilbert and Sullivan melodies. But throughout this amazing athlete's life, he was always proudest of his achievements in the ring. He died on the 23rd of July, 1964, at the age of 89. Although Leelor never campaigned outside South Africa and preferred to box part-time, there's an indication of what he might have achieved when one looks at the accomplishments of one of his best opponents, fireman George Anderson. Anderson could never get the better of Leelor, managing only 1 draw in 8 fights. Yet he was a most competent fighter who more than held his own, losing a hotly debated points decision against the renowned world champion Aaron Brown, better known as the Dixie Kid. Among the many fighters who benefited from Leelor's coaching and advice was Roy Walensky, who later turned to politics and was knighted for his superhuman efforts in trying to resolve the problems in northern and southern Rhodesia. The Second Anglo-Boer War, 1899 to 1902. A terrible beginning to a new century. The war would have a marked effect on the people of South Africa for many years to come, and leave a bitter taste between Boer and Brit. This footage, reported to be filmed by Thomas Edison, the father of moving pictures, is believed to be one of the many films made in Canada at the time, fictitiously depicting the struggle in South Africa. The Boers' fighting spirit and courage in the unequal struggle against the British Empire earned South Africans a great respect throughout the world. So much so that many claim to be South Africans to gain popularity abroad. Rudi Unholtz, a German-born feather and lightweight, enjoyed boasting of his exploits as a member of General de Wet's internationally acclaimed guerrillas. When in Britain, though, he'd change his story and claim that he was a member of Lord Kitchener's troops. Unholtz was one of the best at his weight of the era and performed exceptionally well against the future world lightweight champion, Battling Nelson, in Los Angeles in February 1908. Here's Nelson in vintage action. Nelson found it impossible to solve Unholtz's burrowing style. At the time, no points decisions were given, and where there was no knockout, the decision was left to media and public opinion. One can imagine the controversy surrounding these bouts and the various claims to titles. At that time, anyone could fight for and be claimed as a country's national champion, be it his homeland or not. The general view of the Unholtz-Nelson fight was that the adopted South African had come off best. An intense hatred developed between the two. Nelson invariably referred to Unholtz as the Boer joke. Unholtz's impressive performance over Nelson earned him a shot at Joe Gans's world title. Gans is seen here defending his championship against Nelson, or the Durable Dane as he was called. Gans, an undisputed boxing legend and one of the greatest lightweights of all time, knocked the gallant Unholtz out in the 11th round of their title fight, which took place on the 14th of May, 1908 in San Francisco. Although he lost to Gans, Unholtz had proved himself a top-rate fighter and a definite force in world boxing. Unholtz, who so eagerly claimed to be a South African, was one of Jack Johnson's advisors in his fight against Tommy Burns, which he won to become the first black holder of the world heavyweight title. Burns, the deposed champion, here playing billiards with Unholtz during more friendly days, went so far as to accuse Unholtz of having the filming, believing that they were preventing a murder from being committed. An unlikely but original excuse. After a long boxing career, Unholtz retired in Hollywood, where he hobnobbed with the likes of Mack Sennett of Keystone Cops fame and made the odd appearance in various silent movies of the time. Another interesting connection with Johnson is that Mike Williams, South Africa's first heavyweight hope, was one of his sparring partners. Williams, a fiery Irishman who turned professional at the advanced age of 30, had an incredible punch in both fists. Unfortunately, his temper would often get the better of him, and many of his fights ended in his being disqualified. One of the most brutal fights seen on the Rand in the early years of this century was between Jack Palmer, British middle and heavyweight champion, and Williams, the South African heavyweight champion. The fight turned out to be an 8-round brawl, with Palmer being knocked down 17 times and Williams twice. At the end of the 7th round, Palmer couldn't get to his feet. His seconds dragged him to his corner, and he came out fighting in the 8th. By this time, Williams's face was a swollen mass, and he could barely see. He dropped Palmer another 3 times before the valiant Englishman surrendered. Williams went on to defeat Bill Doherty on a 3rd-round knockout in Australia and claimed the Australian heavyweight title. In this, the first world title fight ever filmed, we see Bob Fitzsimmons beating gentleman Jim Corbett for the heavyweight title in 1897. In 1907, there were rumors aplenty on the reef that Fitzsimmons, who in the interim had lost his world title, would be enticed to Johannesburg to meet Williams. Nothing came of these plans, and Williams eventually faded into retirement. Andrew Yeester, the son of a Cape Town carpenter, became the first coloured fighter to win a British championship. He won the welterweight title in England on March the 25th, 1907. His reign lasted a brief 6 months, and it was to be another 41 years before British boxing rules were relaxed to allow, once again, a coloured fighter to challenge for a domestic title. The tall, slim, and good-looking Yeester was from a fairly well-off background and was educated at Marist Brothers in Hope Street. His dream, to be a professional fist fighter. Yeester won the British title by knocking out Curly Watson in a fight in which he was regarded as a hopeless underdog. For a brief period, Yeester, often billed as the Boer in the UK and Le Nigre in France, was so highly regarded that he was sometimes advertised as the welterweight champion of the world. Even at that early stage of his career, Yeester was having problems with his eyesight. He continued to fight in an era before strict medical supervision, and soon was so blind that he had to grope around the ring trying to find his opponents, consequently enduring appalling punishment. He eventually returned to Cape Town after undergoing an unsuccessful operation on his eyes in Liverpool, and spent his last years sitting on a street corner in Adderley Street, a broken man selling a booklet describing his life in the ring. In the next episode of The Fighters, a boxer from South...